YouTube, Big458 here. Welcome back. Well, I'm still working on that Taurus model 689 VR that I bought a few weeks ago to add back to my collection as a replacement for the first handgun I ever owned. I took all the action parts out of it and cleaned them up real good. I even took a honing stone and cleaned up any kind of burrs or deformities on the metal that may have occurred over the years just from shooting it. And that in itself will kind of smooth the action out a little bit. But I stayed away from all of the sear surfaces because I didn't want to interfere with any of that. The next thing I wanted to do is I want to try to just wet sand the frame and the parts and try to get some of these significant scratches out of it that you see, like right here and right there behind where the cylinder thumb piece is. That came from the piece being loose, and whoever the owner or previous owners were still actuating it, and it was dragging on the frame. It's got some pretty good scratches in there, and it's got some pretty bad scratches right here, which that's not uncommon. You see that a lot on revolvers. And it's got a few on the side plate, and it's not too bad on the back strap, but there are some I want to try to get worked out. Everything else seems to be pretty good. It's got a few little dings, here and there, but nothing major. So I'm gonna try to wet sand some of those out and see what it looks like. Now, because of the overall condition of the gun, I'm not going to have to wet sand it too much, I don't believe. And I typically, if it's pretty bad, I'll usually start with 1,000 grit. But on this one, I'm just going to start with 1,200, and then I'm going to go to 1,500, and then I'm going to finish off with 2,000. I'm not trying to get a mirrored finish, so I'm not going to go beyond that. As I told you in a previous video, you want to make sure that when you're doing any wet sanding that your paper is good and wet. It's been soaking now for about 15 minutes. So it's good and wet. And I'm going to get these action parts out of the way. And we'll go ahead and start doing some wet sanding. So I'm going to start with the 1,200 grit. And you don't want to apply a lot of pressure here. You just want to do just enough to remove the significant scratches. And it's nothing. I'm not sanding on this. I'm just wetting it and just lightly rubbing it with the 1,200 grit paper, just to remove any kind of scratches that may be there. And really all I'm doing is just smoothing out the scratches that are already there, because 1,200 grit really isn't that, it's not that fine. So you're going to have a few that's going to be left behind by the 1,200 grit. But all you want is for things to be sort of uniform. Now I just start on the back strap, and I'll go up in the hammer area. And I just want to get them all. So no pressure, just a little finger pressure is all you need. And it'll usually take care of them. Now there is some pitting on the edge of this frame. Not going to be able to get that out, but what I will do is smooth it off so that when you run your bare finger along the edge, you won't be able to feel it. Now what you're going to see is you just want to see just a nice uniform haze, and you know when you've done enough. Start here on this side plate. Now you want to be careful because this roll stamping, you don't want to mess that up too much, and because there's not a whole lot of scratches here, I'm just going to clean them up a little bit. Clean the side plate up just a little bit. Not going to require a lot of sanding. Just want to make sure everything stays good and wet, because if your paper loads up, you're just going to redeposit scratches back on the gun, and that you don't want to do. Try to keep it as flat as you can. And it's not a lot of work. And what this doing is just removing the scratches, so I don't have to do so much polishing by hand. Polishing the gun with your the polish of choice is going to make the gun, you know, shine a lot. But if you have a lot of scratches on it, you're just going to shine up the scratches. So you're going to have scratches that are going to be far more noticeable because the gun is going to be a lot more reflective. Always remember, if you're going to do any wet sanding or polishing, always wet sand and polish with your screws in place so that the heads of the screws also get the same treatment as the rest of the gun. This won't take too long. Like I said, this gun, it's not really that scratched up. It's just mostly usage scratches, not anything major. And just go all along the gun. You don't have to be too concerned about the stampings and so forth, because you're doing this by hand. You're really not gonna remove enough material to even impact them. And just go along the whole, all of the surfaces of the gun, and you'll see a big improvement when you're done. Now, I'm not concerned about, at this point, which way the manufacturer may have finished the gun. They may have sanded it this way, but I'm not concerned about that. You're not going to get that deep into the metal to change any finishing lines. All you're doing at this point is just trying to get rid of surface scratches. That's actually looking pretty good. So I'm not going to bore you with all of this 1000 grit sanding. I'm going to finish the other side, and then the next time you see me, we'll be on the 1500 grit. But I am going to concentrate a little bit right here in this area where this significant scratch is, because I want to blend that out. I don't know if I'll be able to get it all out, but I'm going to do my best. And I'll see you back in a few minutes with the 1500 grit. Okay, the 1000 grit sanding has been completed, and it actually turned out pretty good. Most all of the significant scratches have been removed or greatly reduced, and it actually looks pretty good. This turned out to be more of a gouge than a scratch. As I stated before, I didn't know how much reduction in that I was going to be able to achieve, but nonetheless, it's been greatly reduced. I think the rest of it will sand out and be whatever it is it be. But I think I'll be happy with it for the most part. Off camera, that probably took another 8 minutes. Didn't want to bore you with all of that stuff. So now we're going to move on to the 1500 grit. And really, we're just going to repeat the process. Nothing scientific here. It's just some light wet sanding. And it's just going to, reduce the polishing steps. All right. So now we're going to move on to the 1500 grit. We're going to repeat the process. Want to make sure your paper stays good and wet, because that's the key. And what you're also going to see with the 1500 grit is you're going to start seeing a slight uptick in the shininess of the stainless, and you're going to see a reduction in the amount of scratches that are left on the surface of the gun. And I'm just going to repeat this. You can already start to see how that's starting to polish up a little bit on its own. So I can get some of this glare off. Yeah, it's already starting to improve. Now the purpose of this 1500 grit is to get out the scratches that were left behind, or the abrasions rather, that were left behind by the 1200 grit, and to remove any less significant scratches that may be there that the 1200 grit didn't fully remove. Now this area is going to be kind of the question mark in this whole process, because how much of that significant gouge is going to be removed. And it's probably not going to be enough where it's going to be completely invisible, but I'll just have to live with it. I'll get it as best as I can, and I'll just live with it, whatever the results are. I think everything else will turn out pretty good. Now this 1500 grit paper, it'll wear out a little bit faster than the 1200 grit paper did, so you'll probably go through a little bit more of that than you did the 1200 grit paper. But you can see how that finish is starting to shine up a lot more. And this is what I was stating, that it just reduces your polishing time, because you know, just kind of understand the difference between polishing and shining. And you'll see how this is benefit when you want to improve the overall finish of a gun and remove scratches. Just a little bit of time you spend wet sanding, it'll cut your polishing time to minutes rather than hours. And that's if you're doing it by hand. If you're doing it on the buffing wheel, then this isn't necessary, because you can use the different grades of polish, and a buffing wheel, and it does the same thing as the wet sanding does, just a whole lot quicker. So anyway, I go right back over all of the same areas with the 1500 grit that I previously did with the 1200 grit. And you'll start seeing a significant increase in the finished quality of the gun. Now I try to go with the grain of the metal whenever possible. Sometimes it's not, and it's no big deal, because what you're doing by hand, you're not going to change anything that was laid in the factory in terms of the finishing grade grain. All you're doing now is smoothing everything out to the point where it actually gives you a more bright, polished finish than it did when it left the factory. So I'm going to finish this off cameras. No need in sitting here and watching me go over this whole gun with 1500 grit paper. You understand the concept. So when I finish with the 1500 grit, I'll come back and we'll start the 2000 grit wet sanding. All right, I'm done with the 1500 grit wet sand, and I meant to point out earlier too is I don't wet sand the face of the cylinder at all. Now, even though I know you wouldn't remove a whole lot of material doing that, if any at all, I still don't do it, because cylinder gap between the front of the cylinder and the forcing cone is so critical. I don't do any wet sanding on the face of the cylinder. But after the 1500 grit sand, you can see how this thing's starting to really develop a much higher level of reflectivity. The frame starting to look really nice. Most all of the scratches have been removed, and with the exception of that gouge right there, I'm just probably going to have to live with that. But as you can see, the reflectivity has come way up on this gun. Most all of the scratches have been removed, at least those that are readily visible by the naked eye. So I'm going to move on to the final wet sand that I'm going to do, which is the 2000 grit. And I'm going to just continue the same process as before, just applying moderate pressure to remove the surface scratches that was left behind by the 1500 grit wet sand. Now at this point, you should definitely start to see the reflectivity of this metal start to go up. And I'm not going to go beyond 2000 grit because I'm not looking for a mirror finish. I just want to kind of recondition gun back to some just a little bit more level of respectability. And I'm going to do this back strap right here so you can see it, and I want to show you how this 2000 grit starts to actually do the polishing for you, so that when you get to your metal polishing, there won't be a whole lot of that to do. It won't take you long at all. Let's see, we can see that. You can see how that's starting to really become reflective. So I'm just going to continue with this 2000 grit. Now I'm not going to be able to get that gouge out. That's a lot deeper than I thought it was, but it's okay. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. As people love to say nowadays, it is what it is. And it will be okay. Now this is starting to get really slick. So this paper is getting harder and harder to hold on to. And because the surface tension on this is so much greater than it was with the 1200 grit, this paper is going to wear out a lot faster. So I'll be going through maybe twice as much of this 2000 grit paper than I did with the 1200 grit. And that's okay, that's what I expect. And it'll be okay. But this is going to look really nice in a few minutes. So I'm not going to bore you with this whole process. I'll come back and show you what it looked like when I finished wet sanding with the 2000 grit. So now I'm done with the 2000 grit wet sand. And what you're seeing now is a finish that is probably, it's above what I would call a satin finish, but it still has just a few little minor directional sanding marks in it. I may need to go back and touch up a couple of places here and there. But for the most part, I'm pretty satisfied with it. It has what I would call just a bright, clear finish. It's not mirrored. It looks more mirrored on camera, but it really isn't. And I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. I can't feel it, but I can still see it. It was a pretty deep gouge, but it turned out okay. So what I'll do from this point is I'll get some Mother's Mag and aluminum polish, and then I'll polish this out. And that'll be the final finish on the gun. But listen, I appreciate you watching. I know this was kind of long and lengthy. I had a lot of requests from people to show me how I actually do this with these revolvers. And I thought this would be a good one to do it on. It was the only one that I had that needed sanding and polishing. So I know it was a bit long, but I appreciate your patience. I appreciate you watching. Till the next time, it's Big Swope 58. Thanks for watching.